So far, we have looked at the early Exodus view as it pertains to Joseph and the reign of King Amenhotep II. But how consistent is the early Exodus view with the biblical account of the Israelite conquest? Find out on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. This is the 5th video in our series on the early date view of the Exodus. Please watch the previous 4 videos before watching this one, as it will give you the necessary background to understand what we are talking about. And if you like these videos, please hit the subscribe button and consider supporting the channel financially by Patreon or by purchasing a copy of my forthcoming book, affiliate link below. We have seen that the early Exodus view distorts the events surrounding the Joseph narrative and the reign of Amenhotep II. But perhaps they can do a better job with the events that come directly after the Exodus, which is the period of Joshua and the Judges. So let's add both the late and early conquests to our chart. One of the issues that the early date view has to deal with is the dating of Jericho and Hatzor. The early date view holds that Jericho was destroyed 40 years after the Exodus, thus in 1406 BC. In the 1940s and 50s, Kathleen Kenyon dated the destruction of the Middle Bronze fortifications at Jericho to 1550 BC. And since Scripture attributes the destruction of Jericho to Joshua in Joshua 6:24, this becomes a key problem for the early date view. So what do the early date supporters do about this? Bryant Wood reevaluated pottery typology at Jericho. Wood claims that Kenyon misdated the destruction of the Middle Bronze fortification, and that Garstang's original date of 1400 BC destruction layer at Jericho was the correct date. This supposedly confirms that the conquest of Canaan began in 1400 BC, 40 years after the early Exodus. Of course, the problem is no one accepts Wood's reevaluation or his typology, except those who already lean towards his way of thinking. But his redating of the Middle Bronze fortification doesn't exactly fix things. Instead, it creates ugly new problems. Wood's 1400 BC redating of the destruction at Jericho makes the destruction of Jericho inconsistent with the destruction layers at Hatzor. Jericho and Hatzor were both destroyed by Joshua, so within the same lifetime. Now, few people realize that Kathleen Kenyon dated 2 destruction layers at Jericho, one to 1550 BC and the other to the late 13th century BC. If Hatzor and Jericho were both destroyed during the Israelite conquest, then we should find destruction layers that match both cities within a generation. The excavations at Hatzor have shown that the city was continuously occupied from 1450 BC until 1200 BC. Hatzor does not have a destruction layer that dates to the late 15th century, matching what is found at Jericho. But it does have a late 13th century destruction layer. Interestingly, I put this to Wood at a public debate to which I got silence as a response. But there's another issue with the redating Wood does. The biblical text tells us that Rahab lived in the walls of Jericho, Joshua 2:15. Middle Bronze fortifications are a single wall of large blocks, while Late Bronze, Early Iron Age walls are of a casemate design. Casemate walls are essentially two walls made of small stones that were filled with rubble. And sometimes people live between the walls. And that's what we have with Rahab's home. So even the Bible itself shows that the conquest takes place near the end of the Late Bronze Age. So let's place the occupation of Hatzor on our chart. But the early date view faces other challenges with, say, the Amarna letters. During the excavation of Amarna, the capital city of King Akhenaten, several diplomatic letters from well-known ancient Near Eastern kings were discovered. The Amarna letters, published in 1907 and 1915, affected scholars' understanding of Egyptian chronology and made the early date view much harder to hold on to. The Amarna letters opened a window into Levantine politics during the Late Bronze Age and exposed a conflict between a rigid reading of 1 Kings 6:1 and the Israelite Conquest. Joshua 11:11 says, Joshua destroyed Hatzor with fire. Joshua must have been at least 13 years old at the time he was sent as a spy into Canaan, Numbers 13:2. And if we grant that Joshua could have lived to 110, Joshua 2:8, then he died no later than 1349 BC. The problem is that Abdi-Tirshi, the king of Hatzor, ruled well into the reign of Akhenaten, who reigned from 1351 to 1335 BC. Thus, he was not only ruling, but also still expanding his territory in 1349 BC, long after the Israelites should have conquered the Holy Land in their conquest. The early date view doesn't allow enough time for everything that Abdi-Tirshi accomplished during his reign. Furthermore, the biblical text identifies the king of Hatzor as Jabin, not Abdi-Tirshi, and shows that Hatzor had completed its territorial expansion by the time Joshua encountered it, Joshua 11:1 and 10. The Amarna letters show that a different king other than Jabin was reigning when the early date conquest should have been complete. This indicates that Joshua's life and the conquest took place after the events described in the Amarna letters. Without a credible Joseph account and without a credible conquest narrative, there isn't a credible early Exodus date. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy these videos, please hit that subscribe button below. In the next video, the early date strikes back, the best counter-arguments for the early Exodus date, next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.